The boardroom on the 47th floor smelled of leather and old money, the kind that never apologized for existing. 15 directors sat around a table carved from a single piece of walnut, their faces arranged in varying degrees of skepticism and impatience. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan stretched toward the horizon, a forest of glass and steel that had forgotten how to bend. Margot Ashford stood at the head of the table, her spine straight as rebar, her hands flat against the polished surface. The navy suit she wore cost more than most people earned in a month, but the shadows under her eyes suggested money couldn't buy sleep anymore. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proposing immediate restructuring, starting with executive accountability. Preston Vance leaned back in his chair at the opposite end, his smile the kind that belonged in corporate warfare. Salt and pepper hair swept back from a forehead that had learned to hide calculation behind charm. Margot, you're emotional. The merger with Silverstone Capital is our only viable path forward. The shareholders, the merger is off, and you're fired, Preston. The room went silent, the kind of quiet that precedes earthquakes. Preston's smile didn't falter, but something flickered behind his eyes, something that knew the ground had just shifted. You can't. I have 31% equity and board support. This is a coup attempt, and it won't stand. The door behind Margot opened. Every head turned. A man entered wearing a charcoal suit that fit like it had been tailored on Savile Row, carrying a leather folder that looked older than half the people in the room. His skin was the deep brown of polished mahogany, his face carved with the kind of calm that came from surviving storms no one else could see. Three directors gasped. One dropped her phone. The man from finance whispered something that sounded like disbelief wrapped in profanity. That's the janitor. Isaiah Brennan walked to Margot's side, his movements unhurried, his eyes fixed on Preston with the patience of someone who had learned to wait for the right moment. He set the folder on the table, opened it to reveal a stack of documents 2 inches thick. Former janitor. His voice carried the weight of courtrooms and lecture halls, places where words mattered more than money. But Isaiah Brennan, clinical psychology, Johns Hopkins. I have evidence of systematic discrimination spanning 6 years, 39 employees, $1.7 million in suppressed wages. Preston's face drained of color, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. This is blackmail. No, sir. This is justice. And it started 4 months ago when you tried to fire me for sitting on a floor. The image froze in that moment, suspended between past and future, between what had been hidden and what would soon burn in daylight. 4 months earlier, the city had looked different through Isaiah's eyes. Not smaller or larger, just farther away, as if he were watching it through glass that wouldn't break no matter how hard the world pressed against it. The subway car rattled through darkness beneath the Bronx, carrying the smell of disinfectant and exhaustion. 11:45 at night meant the train belonged to people like him, the ones who cleaned what others built, who moved through spaces after the important people had gone home to lives that fit inside Instagram frames. His reflection stared back from the window, a man of 38 who looked older in certain lights. The thrift store jacket hung loose on shoulders that had once filled out Columbia blue scrubs back when his hands had held clipboards instead of mop handles, when his voice had guided parents through the worst moments of their lives with a steadiness that came from training and belief that systems could help. The belief had died with Caleb. Isaiah closed his eyes against the memory, but it came anyway, stubborn as hope used to be. Hospital room 412, the machines that beeped out a 5-year-old's heartbeat like Morse code for goodbye. Rachel's voice on the phone cracking under the weight of a question no mother should have to ask. How long? Not how long until he gets better, because leukemia had made that impossible. How long until their son stopped being a collection of vital signs and became a memory that would follow them into every empty room for the rest of their lives? 2 weeks, the oncologist had said. Caleb had made it 3, because even at 5, that kid had been stubborn about leaving. His last words cycled through Isaiah's mind on an endless loop, worn smooth by repetition, but never losing their edges. Daddy, hope is a stubborn thing. It doesn't leave even when we do. Then the flat line, and with it, the end of everything Isaiah had built. The private practice in Baltimore. The consulting work with the Department of Education on childhood trauma protocols. The marriage to a woman who had loved him until grief turned them into strangers who couldn't look at each other without seeing what they'd lost. Simone had tried. God knows she'd tried. But Isaiah had become a man made of silence, answering questions with shrugs, turning away from comfort, because accepting it meant admitting Caleb was gone. And not just sleeping in the next room, not just away at summer camp, not just about to walk through the door with that gap-toothed smile that could light up a morgue. 6 months after the funeral, Simone had packed her things into a Honda Civic and driven away from their townhouse, leaving behind a note that said, "I can't save you from this," in handwriting that shook with exhaustion. The divorce papers had arrived 3 weeks later. Isaiah had signed them without reading past the first page because she was right. No one could save him. He'd been a professional rescuer, and he couldn't rescue himself. The subway lurched to a stop. Fordham Road. Isaiah stood and moved toward the door, muscle memory carrying him through the motions of existing. Outside, the November air bit through his jacket, reminding him that bodies still felt cold even when everything else had gone numb. Ashford Global Tower rose 30 blocks south, a needle of glass and ambition that pierced the sky like it was trying to pin heaven in place. Isaiah walked because the night shift started at midnight, and arriving early meant fewer people to navigate around, fewer chances of someone asking how he was doing in that tone that expected him to lie and say fine. The basement entrance smelled like concrete and industrial cleaner, a scent Isaiah had learned to find comforting in its honesty. Nothing down here pretended to be anything other than what it was. The locker room stretched out in fluorescent harshness, metal doors in rows, nameplates that read like a census of people the building needed but didn't see. Rodriguez? Washington? Kim? Brennan? Isaiah opened his locker. Inside, taped to the door, a photograph looked back at him. Caleb at 4 bald from the first round of chemo, holding a paper crane made from construction paper because the real origami paper had been too expensive. The smile on that kid's face could have powered the entire building. Next to the photo, a stack of origami paper in every color. Isaiah had started carrying it 2 years ago, folding cranes during breaks because his hands needed something to do that wasn't trying to hold on to what had already slipped away. 347 cranes sat in a box at his apartment in the Bronx, each one a prayer to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore, but couldn't quite stop talking to just in case. He changed into the Navy uniform with Ashford Global, embroidered above the pocket, loaded his cleaning cart with supplies that cost more per bottle than his hourly wage, and took the service elevator up to the executive floors. The building after midnight belonged to a different species than the one that existed during business hours. Empty, it became honest. You could see the coffee stains on carpet that looked pristine at 8 in the morning, the fingerprints on glass that claimed to be spotless, the humanity that capitalism tried to buff away. Floor 47, Executive Suites. Isaiah pushed his cart down the hallway, his movements practiced and efficient. He'd been doing this for 18 months ever since he'd left Baltimore, and everything it represented ever since he'd decided that disappearing into work that required nothing of his heart was the only sustainable way to exist. Preston Vance's office sat at the corner windows on 2 sides, a view that could make you believe you were untouchable if you stared at it long enough. The door hung slightly ajar, voices drifting out into the hallway. Isaiah paused not because he intended to eavesdrop, but because sudden movements attracted attention, and he'd learned to be a ghost. HR flagged another discrimination complaint. Make it go away. Preston's voice carried the casual authority of someone used to problems dissolving at his command. That's the 3rd one this quarter. A woman's voice, younger, uncertain. Which is why we make them go away. Cheaper than litigation, cleaner than admitting fault. Standard protocol. Isaiah's hand tightened on the mop handle. He'd heard variations of this conversation before in graduate seminars on institutional bias and case studies about how systems protected themselves at the expense of the people they were supposed to serve. But hearing it in real-time, casual as discussing the weather, made his stomach turn with something that felt dangerously close to the anger he'd learned to bury. He moved to the next office, giving Preston's door a wide berth. The rest of the floor cleaned itself through the mechanical repetition of spray and wipe vacuum and dust. Isaiah's mind wandered the way it always did during these hours, skating across the surface of memories without diving deep enough to drown. By 2:30, he'd finished the executive floor and moved down to the main lobby. The marble floor stretched out like an ice rink, polished to the kind of shine that made you think twice about walking on it. Isaiah started in the far corner, working in sections, the mop leaving dark trails that evaporated into gleaming stone. The elevator dinged. Isaiah glanced up, instinct more than interest. The private elevator, the one that went directly to the penthouse levels, the one he'd never seen anyone use after midnight. A child stepped out. Isaiah froze. Not the dramatic kind of freeze that came with surprise, but the deep cellular kind that happened when your body remembered trauma faster than your mind could process it. Small children meant grief. They meant remembering. They meant the thing he'd spent 4 years trying to avoid. The girl couldn't have been more than 6, wearing a nightgown that probably cost more than Isaiah's monthly rent her feet bare against the marble. She clutched something in her left hand, a watch adult size, the kind that had belonged to someone important. She walked toward him with the kind of certainty children had before the world taught them to be afraid of strangers. Isaiah's hands shook, the mop handle suddenly too heavy, his breathing shallow. He wanted to run, wanted to hide, wanted to be anywhere but here, confronted with the living proof that some children survived while his hadn't. The girl stopped 4 feet away, studied him with eyes that looked older than 6 eyes that knew something about loss. Because grief left marks you could recognize, even when you didn't have words for them yet. Isaiah forced himself to speak, his voice coming out rough from disuse and panic. "Hi there, you okay?" She didn't answer, just sat down on the floor cross-legged, still holding the watch. Every instinct Isaiah had screamed at him to call security, to get an adult to remove himself from a situation that could be misunderstood in ways that would destroy what little remained of his life. But something in the way she sat there, patient, expectant, not asking for anything except presence, made him pause. Slowly, like approaching a wounded animal, Isaiah set down the mop, moved 6 feet away from the girl, sat on the floor, his back against the marble wall, his hands visible, his posture as non-threatening as he could make it. "I'm just cleaning. You can stay if you want. No talking required." The minutes crawled by. Isaiah counted them on the security camera timestamp visible in his peripheral vision. 3 minutes. 5. 8. The girl traced patterns on the marble with her finger, some kind of design Isaiah couldn't decipher from this distance. His hand went to his pocket, muscle memory, taking over before his mind could object. The origami paper lived there, always a square of blue that had been folded and unfolded so many times it felt soft as cloth. Isaiah's fingers moved without conscious thought, the crane taking shape through memory and repetition. Beak, wings, tail. The miracle of something beautiful made from what had started as nothing but a flat surface. He slid the crane across the marble. It stopped halfway between them, a bridge made of paper and patience. The girl picked it up, held it up to the light, watched the way the fluorescence caught the creases. Her mouth moved. Isaiah leaned forward without meaning to, his heart suddenly loud in his ears. "My daddy used to make birds too." The words came out as a whisper, barely louder than breathing, but they shattered something in the air between them. Isaiah felt his eyes sting his throat close up with the kind of emotion he'd kept locked away so long he'd forgotten it could still ambush him. "What's your name?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. "Ruby, what's yours?" "Isaiah." He had to swallow twice before the next words came. "Are you sad too?" Ruby nodded, solemn as a judge delivering a verdict. "Since Daddy went away in the helicopter, Mommy says he's not coming back." "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, but grief didn't have a vocabulary that matched its weight. "My son, he went away too, 4 years ago. Does it stop hurting?" Isaiah considered lying the way adults did when children asked questions that deserved honesty, but wouldn't get it. But something about this moment, about sitting on a marble floor at 2 in the morning with a girl who understood loss, made dishonesty feel like a betrayal of something sacred. "No, but you learn to carry it different, like a stone in your pocket. Heavy, but yours." Ruby studied him for another long moment, then nodded again, this acceptance of hard truth that broke Isaiah's heart all over again, because 6-year-olds shouldn't have to develop that kind of wisdom. "Can we be sad together, quiet-like?" "Yeah, kiddo, we can do that." They sat there for another 10 minutes, two people who'd lost everything that mattered, finding something resembling peace in shared silence. Isaiah didn't try to fix her grief or explain it away, didn't offer platitudes about time healing or loved ones watching from heaven. Just sat with her in the wreckage, because sometimes that was the only honest thing you could do. The elevator dinged again. Isaiah tensed, knowing whatever fragile thing had just happened was about to be crushed under the weight of adult panic and misunderstanding. Security poured out. 3 guards, radios, crackling faces tight with the kind of fear that came from losing track of a billionaire's child. They saw Isaiah on the floor, saw Ruby, and their hands went to their belts where the equipment lived that could turn a misunderstanding into a tragedy. "Step away from the child." Isaiah raised his hands, slow and deliberate, every movement screaming non-threatening, because he'd lived in brown skin long enough to know how these situations could spiral. "She came down on her own. I was just sitting here." "Ruby Ashford, are you hurt?" The lead guard, a white man in his 50s, whose name tag read Morrison, positioned himself between Isaiah and the girl. "No." Ruby's voice came out, stronger now, indignant. "Isaiah's nice. We were being sad together." Morrison spoke into his radio, words Isaiah couldn't make out, but the tone suggested someone important was about to arrive, and this night was about to get significantly worse. The elevator opened a third time. A woman stepped out, expensive pajamas under a designer coat hair that had been perfect before panic had run fingers through it. Even at 3 in the morning, Margot Ashford looked like someone who owned buildings and expected the world to rearrange itself around her convenience. She saw Ruby first relief and fury warring across her face. Then her eyes found Isaiah still sitting against the wall, still holding his hands where everyone could see them. Ruby Ashford, what were you thinking? I wanted to see the birds, Mommy. Isaiah makes them. Margot's gaze swept over the origami crane Ruby still clutched, then back to Isaiah with an expression that suggested she was calculating risk and liability at a speed that would make computers jealous. You. Her voice could have frozen the Hudson. My office, tomorrow morning, 9 sharp. Isaiah nodded, knowing tomorrow meant being fired, possibly arrested, definitely destroyed. But Ruby was safe, and that mattered more than whatever consequences were about to rain down on his head. Security escorted him to the locker room, waited while he changed back into street clothes, then walked him out the basement entrance with instructions not to return until the meeting. Isaiah stood on the sidewalk, the November cold biting through his jacket, and wondered if he should just keep walking. Leave the city, change his name, start over somewhere that didn't have marble lobbies and children who reminded him of everything he'd lost. But Caleb's voice echoed in his memory, stubborn as always. Hope is a stubborn thing, it doesn't leave even when we do. Isaiah walked home through streets that were starting to wake up, past buildings that were beginning to remember they served a purpose beyond just existing. His apartment in the Bronx waited for him, a studio efficiency that cost $790 a month and contained everything he owned that mattered. Caleb's photo, 347 paper cranes, a box of medical bills he was still paying off $5 at a time. He didn't sleep, just sat at the card table that served as desk and dining surface, staring at the wall where he'd taped Caleb's drawings from kindergarten back when the future had stretched out full of possibility, instead of contracting into this single point of just getting through each day. His phone buzzed at 7, a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Brennan, this is Dr. Rowena Foster. I'm Ruby Ashford's therapist. Isaiah's stomach dropped. This was it. The accusations, the legal threats, the carefully worded warnings about staying away from the child or facing prosecution. I need to talk to you about what happened last night. Foster's voice carried an urgency that didn't match the expected script. Can you meet me before your appointment with Ms. Ashford? There's a cafe 2 blocks from the tower, 7:30. The cafe smelled like espresso and ambition, full of people in business casual getting their caffeine before diving into jobs that paid enough to afford $7 lattes. Isaiah ordered black coffee and sat in the back watching the door, his nerves singing with the particular anxiety of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Dr. Foster arrived precisely at 7:30, a black woman in her late 50s with silver braids and eyes that had seen enough human suffering to recognize it in others. She sat across from Isaiah without asking permission, set her bag on the table between them like establishing neutral ground. You're not in trouble, not from me anyway. Isaiah blinked, thrown off balance by words that didn't match his expectations. Then why? Because Ruby spoke last night, first time in 5 months. Foster pulled a tablet from her bag, tapped it awake. I've been working with that child since her father died. 9 different specialists before me, thousands of dollars in therapy, every technique in the book. Nothing. She went completely nonverbal after she saw the news footage of the helicopter crash. The tablet showed security footage from the lobby. Isaiah watched himself sit against the wall, watched the paper crane slide across marble, watched Ruby's mouth move in that first whisper. What did you do? Foster's question came without accusation, just genuine curiosity from someone who spent her life trying to understand how people healed. Nothing. I just sat there. No, you did something most people can't manage. You gave her space without expectation. You didn't try to fix her or force her to be okay. You just existed alongside her grief. Foster paused. I looked you up. Dr. Isaiah Brennan, Johns Hopkins, published 14 papers on childhood trauma, consulted with the Department of Education. Then you disappeared in 2018. Isaiah's hands tightened around his coffee cup. That was someone else's life. Was it, or was it the same life just before it broke? The question hung between them, impossible to answer in a way that didn't require tearing open wounds that had barely scabbed over. Isaiah chose silence, letting the cafe noise fill the space where his response should have been. Foster leaned forward. Margot Ashford is going to fire you this morning. She's terrified, and terrified mothers make decisions that prioritize control over what's right. But before she does, I need you to know something. She tapped her tablet again, pulling up a document. I'm recommending you as Ruby's primary therapeutic support. Full disclosure of your credentials, your experience, and yes, your son's death. Because that's not a liability, Dr. Brennan. That's why she trusted you. Isaiah shook his head, the panic rising in his chest like floodwater. I can't. I can't be around children. That's why I work nights. That's why I left psychology. I can't or won't. Foster's voice stayed gentle, but the question cut anyway. Ruby needs someone who understands that grief doesn't follow a schedule. Someone who won't tell her to be brave or strong or any of the other useless things people say when they don't know what else to do. She needs someone who can sit in the dark with her until she's ready to find the light. I'm not qualified anymore. Bullshit. Foster's profanity came out matter-of-fact, stripped of aggression. You're more qualified than every specialist Margot has hired precisely because you know what it costs. The question is whether you're brave enough to pay it again. Isaiah stood his chair, scraping against tile. I'm not brave, Dr. Foster. I'm barely functional. I work a job that requires nothing from me because I have nothing left to give. That little girl deserves better than someone who understands her, than someone who won't lie about how much it hurts. Foster stood, two closing the distance between them. I'm not asking you to save her, Isaiah. I'm asking you to sit with her, like you did last night, that's all. Just show up. The walk to Ashford Tower took 5 minutes, but felt like crossing a desert. Isaiah's mind raced through every possible outcome, none of them good. Best case, he got fired and walked away. Worst case, he got arrested for something that would follow him for the rest of his life, making even janitorial work impossible to find. The elevator to the 47th floor moved too fast and too slow simultaneously. Isaiah stared at his reflection in the polished metal, seeing someone who looked like they'd aged a decade in the past 12 hours. The doors opened onto a reception area that cost more than most people's houses, all minimalist design and art that probably had meaning to someone who understood that language. Mr. Brennan, Ms. Ashford will see you now. The assistant's voice carried that particular tone of polite disdain reserved for people who'd broken unspoken rules about staying in their designated social strata. Isaiah followed her down a hallway where every surface reflected light, making it impossible to hide or disappear. Margot Ashford's office occupied the corner windows on two sides, offering views that reminded you who owned what. She stood behind a glass desk that was somehow both transparent and impenetrable. Her posture rigid with the kind of control that came from a lifetime of being in charge. She didn't invite him to sit, didn't offer pleasantries, just stared at him with eyes that were trying to solve an equation where all the variables kept changing. Explain what you did to my daughter. Isaiah kept his hands visible, his voice steady despite the adrenaline making his heart thunder. I sat, ma'am, that's all. She approached me. I gave her space. Margot pulled out her phone, played the security footage. The sound was off, but Isaiah could fill in the silence. Remember every word that had passed between him and Ruby in that lobby. When it finished, Margot set the phone down with the precision of someone placing explosives. She spoke, first time in 5 months, to a... She paused, and Isaiah braced for whatever word would come next. Stranger. Worker. The careful language people used when they couldn't say what they really meant. Janitor. Margot finished, and somehow that felt worse than any slur could have because it erased him into a job title, a function, a problem to be managed. Yes, ma'am. I've paid 9 specialists $180,000 combined. You did it with a paper bird. Her voice carried something between wonder and fury, like she couldn't decide whether to thank him or destroy him. Children speak when they are not forced to, ma'am. They trust silence more than promises. Margot walked to the window, her back to Isaiah, her reflection ghostly against the Manhattan skyline. I'm going to make you an offer. $15,000 per month. Private sessions with Ruby. After your shift. Completely confidential. No one needs to know a janitor is moonlighting as my daughter's therapist. The numbers didn't matter. The money didn't matter. What mattered was the casual assumption that everything could be bought, that his expertise and his grief and his broken heart were just another commodity to be acquired and deployed. No, ma'am. Margot turned, surprise cracking through her controlled expression. Excuse me, do you know who I am? Yes, ma'am, CEO of Ashford Global, Net worth approximately 1.8 billion. Widow of Graham Ashford, who died at 22 months ago when his helicopter went down over the Hudson. Mother to Ruby, who hasn't spoken since the news showed footage of wreckage being pulled from the water. Margot's face went pale. How do you? I pay attention, and I know grief when I see it because I'm living in the same house you are. Different address, same rooms. The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of something that would either break into understanding or shatter into permanent disconnection. Margot's hands gripped the windowsill, her knuckles going white. Then help her. Please, whatever you want. She doesn't need more specialists, ma'am. She needs someone who's felt what she feels. And that can't be bought. Isaiah moved toward the door, knowing he was about to walk out of steady employment and back into the uncertain darkness of starting over. But you don't know who Ruby is, not really. And you won't until you stop buying answers and start sitting in the questions with her. How dare you presume to tell me about my own daughter? Isaiah turned at the door, meeting Margot's eyes with the directness that came from having nothing left to lose. Your husband knew something you forgot. Sometimes the best thing you can give a child is space to breathe. Maybe that's why Ruby trusted a stranger. I gave her quiet. He walked out before Margot could respond past the assistant, whose expression suggested she'd never seen anyone talk to her boss that way, past the elevator to the stairs, because he needed the physical act of descending, of moving away from this moment and whatever consequences it would birth. The basement locker room waited for him, familiar and honest. Isaiah opened his locker, looked at Caleb's photo one more time. Sorry, buddy, I tried, but some things are too broken to fix, and I'm pretty sure I'm one of them. He was packing his cleaning supplies when Morrison found him, the same security guard from last night, his face unreadable. Ms. Ashford wants you escorted out. Orders are you're not to return. Morrison paused, something in his posture suggesting he didn't entirely agree with the orders he was carrying out. For what it's worth, I watched that footage. You did right by the kid. Isaiah nodded, shouldering his backpack. Thanks. The walk through the building felt like a funeral procession for a life that had never quite come back after Caleb died. Out the basement entrance onto streets that were fully awake now, people rushing to jobs that mattered, to meetings that would change something, to lives that had forward momentum, while Isaiah's kept circling the same drain of just barely surviving. He walked to the subway, descended into the tunnels that smelled like piss and broken dreams, waited for a train that would carry him back to an apartment that contained everything he owned and nothing that made existence feel like more than just taking up space. His phone buzzed, unknown number. He almost didn't check it, but something made him look. Text message. This is Dr. Foster. Margot wants to apologize. Will you meet her? Isaiah deleted the message, pocketed his phone, and stepped onto the train. Some things were beyond apologizing. Some burns went too deep for sorry to reach. But Caleb's voice followed him home, stubborn as always, refusing to let him disappear completely. Hope is a stubborn thing, Daddy. It doesn't leave even when we do. Isaiah sat in his apartment as the day burned through, morning into afternoon, staring at 347 paper cranes and wondering if hope was stubborn enough to survive what came next. 3 days passed like stones sinking through mud, slow, inevitable, heavy, with the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. Isaiah spent them in his apartment, staring at walls that had memorized his grief, watching the November light crawl across floors that held no answers. The bills on his card table multiplied despite his best efforts to ignore them. Rent due in 9 days, $790 he didn't have now that Ashford Global had closed its doors to him. The hospital debt from Caleb's final months sat at $12,400, a number that never seemed to shrink no matter how many $5 payments he sent. His phone stayed silent except for Simone's text on the third day. Caleb's birthday next week. Cemetery at 10. You should come. Isaiah stared at the message until the screen went dark, then set the phone face down on the table. 4 years since the funeral, and he still couldn't make himself stand over dirt that held what used to be laughter and questions in a boy who'd believed his father could fix anything. On the fourth morning, someone knocked. Isaiah checked the peephole, half expecting landlord or collection agency people whose patience had limits and whose mercy ran thinner than water. Instead, Dr. Foster stood in the hallway wearing a wool coat against the cold and an expression that suggested she'd anticipated the door wouldn't open. Isaiah opened it anyway because some battles weren't worth fighting. I'm not here from Margot. Foster stepped in without invitation, her eyes sweeping the efficiency apartment in seconds, taking in the sparse furniture and the wall covered in Caleb's kindergarten artwork. I'm here because Ruby asked where you went. She shouldn't ask about me. She asked if sad people disappear when other people get mad at them. Foster set her bag on the card table. I didn't have a good answer. Do you, Isaiah moved to the window looking down at the street where people navigated their Friday morning routines with the certainty of those who believed tomorrow would come and resemble today. I told Ms. Ashford the truth. She didn't like it. That's the end of the story. Except Ruby stopped eating, sits in her room folding paper trying to make birds like you did. They keep falling apart because she's 6 and doesn't know the technique, and every failed crane makes her cry harder. Foster pulled something from her bag, a stack of mangled origami attempts, each one a small disaster of good intentions and insufficient skill. These were in the trash. The housekeeper saved them because she thought they mattered. The paper felt thin between Isaiah's fingers, creased wrong, folded with the determination of someone who believed effort could substitute for knowledge. He set them down gently, these artifacts of a child's attempt to hold on to connection through replication. I can't be what she needs. What if what she needs is exactly who you are? Broken, honest, still standing despite everything trying to knock you down. Foster pulled an envelope from her coat. Margot sent this. I told her not to. That money was the wrong language, but she doesn't speak any other fluently yet. Isaiah didn't open it. The thickness suggested cash, probably more than he'd make in 3 months of mopping floors. Enough to buy time. Never enough to buy back what he'd lost. Tell her no. Tell her yourself. She's downstairs, waiting in a car that probably costs more than this building. She's been sitting there for 2 hours because she's afraid if she leaves, you'll disappear completely, and Ruby will blame her for driving away another person who understood. Foster moved toward the door. For someone who claims to know grief, you're remarkably blind to it in others. Margot's drowning, same as you. Difference is, she's got a 6-year-old holding her hand, and you're just treading water alone. The door closed with a softness that felt more damning than slamming. Isaiah stood in the center of his apartment, surrounded by the architecture of survival that had somehow become mistaken for living. 347 paper cranes watched from their box. Caleb's photo asked questions with that gap-toothed smile. The mangled origami attempts from Ruby spread across his table like evidence of hope that didn't know when to quit. Isaiah grabbed his jacket and went downstairs. The town car idled at the curb, black and gleaming, driven by someone paid to wait without asking questions. Margot sat in the back seat, visible through tinted glass that turned the world outside into shadows and suggestions. Isaiah opened the door before courage could abandon him. Margot looked smaller in person than she had in her office. The power suit had been replaced by jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Isaiah's entire wardrobe, but was trying to pretend it hadn't. Dark circles carved shadows under her eyes. Her hands twisted a tissue into fragments. I'm sorry. The words came out raw, unpolished, stripped of the corporate veneer that usually lacquered her speech. For firing you. For offering money like it could fix something that isn't about money. For not listening when you tried to tell me what Ruby needed. Isaiah slid into the seat, but left the door open, one foot still on the pavement, maintaining an escape route. Why are you here, Ms. Ashford? Because Ruby drew a picture. Margot pulled a folded paper from her purse. Her first drawing since Graham died. The paper showed 3 figures in crayon. A small one with yellow hair. A tall one with brown skin. Both sitting on a blue floor. Between them, a bird with wings that spread wider than the page could hold. Above them, written in the careful letters of a 6-year-old who'd asked how to spell the words, "When sad people sit together, the sad gets smaller." Isaiah's throat closed. His eyes burned with the particular sting of tears that had been held back so long they'd forgotten the way out. He folded the paper carefully, handed it back to Margot, and tried to find words in a vocabulary that had been reduced to just getting through each hour. She's wrong. Sad doesn't get smaller. It just gets company. Is that worse? Sometimes it's the only thing that makes it bearable. Isaiah finally looked directly at Margot, seeing past the billion-dollar net worth to the woman who'd lost her husband to mechanical failure and gravity, whose daughter had gone silent in response to trauma that no amount of money could prevent or cure. Dr. Foster told you my credentials. Former clinical psychologist, Johns Hopkins, 14 published papers, Department of Education consultant, resigned in 2018, 6 months after your son died. Margot recited the facts like testimony evidence gathered to build a case. You disappeared, took a job that required nothing, worked nights so you wouldn't have to see children. Then you understand why I can't help Ruby. No, I understand why you're afraid to try in. There's a difference. Margot's voice steadied some of the executive returning. I'm not asking you to stop grieving. I'm asking you to let Ruby grieve alongside you the way she did on that lobby floor. No fixing, no therapy protocols, just existing in the same space without pretending it doesn't hurt. And when she asks questions I can't answer, when she wants to know why bad things happen to good people, why fathers die and leave daughters behind, Isaiah's hands clenched. I couldn't answer those for my own son. I sure as hell can't answer them for yours. Then tell her you don't know. Tell her it's not fair and it hurts and some days you can barely get out of bed. Tell her the truth because everyone else in her life keeps lying and calling it protection. The driver's eyes appeared in the rearview mirror, patient and professional trained to see nothing that wasn't his business. Traffic moved past on the street. A siren wailed somewhere distant. The ordinary machinery of the city ground forward while Isaiah sat in a car worth more than he'd earn in 5 years and tried to decide if hope was stubborn enough to survive what helping Ruby would cost him. I have conditions. Margot's posture shifted, becoming the negotiator who'd built a consulting empire from her husband's foundation. Name them. First, no money. I won't take your salary. If I do this, it's because Ruby deserves better than what you've been able to give her, not because you're paying me to care. That's not sus. Second, you attend family therapy with Dr. Foster every week. You learn to listen instead of managing. You sit with Ruby's pain instead of trying to buy solutions for it. Margot's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Third, I document everything. Every interaction, every session. For legal protection, because I've watched enough innocent men get destroyed by misunderstanding, and I'm not letting that happen. Agreed. Fourth, Isaiah paused, the next words requiring something that felt dangerously close to vulnerability. I'm investigating Preston Vance, the discrimination I overheard. I saw documents that night, took photos. If I'm going to be in your building, I need access to verify what I think I saw. Margot's expression shifted from grief to calculation, the CEO evaluating risks and potential liability. Why kabam? Because 39 people are getting crushed by a system that's supposed to be neutral, and no one with power cares enough to check. Because if I'm going to be around Ruby, I need to believe that truth still matters somewhere, that justice isn't just a word people use when it's convenient. Isaiah met her eyes. Because my son died believing his father could make things better, and I'm tired of proving him wrong. The silence stretched thin between them. Margot stared out the window at the Bronx streets, at a world so far removed from her penthouse that it might as well be another planet. When she turned back, something had shifted in her face, not acceptance exactly, but recognition. If you find evidence of discrimination, I need to know. Before you do anything with it. This company is my husband's legacy. I won't let it be destroyed by accountability. Isaiah's voice stayed level. If Preston's dirty, that's not my doing. That's his choice. I'm just bringing receipts. Then bring them to me first. Give me a chance to fix it internally before it becomes a federal case. Show him. And if internal fixing means burying it, Margot's hands stopped twisting the tissue. Then I'll learn what kind of person I am when no one's watching. Deal. Isaiah extended his hand. The shake was brief, professional, carrying the weight of an agreement that would either save them both or destroy whatever remained of their separate, fractured lives. The town car dropped him back at his building 30 minutes later. Isaiah climbed the stairs to his apartment, unlocked the door, and found his phone ringing. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Mr. Brennan, this is Trinity School. We need to discuss Ruby Ashford's enrollment. The voice belonged to someone whose title probably included words like headmaster or director, someone used to conversations where money smoothed obstacles and influence opened doors. Isaiah's stomach tightened with the particular dread of knowing what came next. I'm not her parent. We're aware. Ms. Ashford listed you as an emergency contact this morning. Quite irregular, but given the circumstances. Papers rustled. Ruby's been having difficulties. Outbursts in class, refusal to participate. Today, she locked herself in a bathroom stall and wouldn't come out until we agreed to call you. Is she hurt? Emotionally distressed. The school counselor is with her now, but she keeps asking for Isaiah, who makes the birds. The other children have begun to notice her behavior. Parents are expressing concerns about disruption to the learning environment. Translation. Rich parents worried their rich children might catch trauma like it was contagious, might learn that grief existed beyond the sanitized versions presented in picture books where everyone healed by page 32. I'll be there in 40 minutes. We close at 3:30 on Fridays. Perhaps Monday would be more. Isaiah hung up and called Margot. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with the strain of someone who'd been waiting for disaster. Trinity called. Ruby locked herself in a bathroom. I know. They called me first. I'm 10 minutes away. They're threatening to expel her. Over my dead body, I've already told them. Ms. Ashford. Isaiah cut through her rising fury with the calm he'd learned from years of talking parents off ledges when their children's diagnoses came back grim. Let me handle it. You being there in full CEO mode will make it worse. These people fear your money. They don't respect your pain, but they might listen to someone with credentials who can speak their language. You want me to stay away from my own daughter when she's having a crisis? I want you to trust that sometimes the best way to help is to let someone else go first. Ruby asked for me, not because you failed, but because I'm not trying to fix her. I'm just willing to sit in the mess with her. The silence on the other end lasted long enough for Isaiah to wonder if he'd overstepped, pushed too hard, demanded too much from a woman who'd already surrendered more control than her entire life had prepared her to handle. Okay, but if they try to expel her, I'm burning that school to the ground. Noted, I'll call you after. Trinity School occupied a brownstone in the East 60s, the kind of place where tuition cost more than most people's annual salary in exclusivity was a feature, not a bug. Isaiah arrived in his thrift store jacket, his Bronx address practically visible, in the way he moved through spaces designed to remind people like him they didn't belong. The receptionist's expression confirmed his assessment. Her smile was professional and distant, the kind that said, "May I help you?" while meaning, "Please leave." Isaiah Brennan, I'm here about Ruby Ashford. And you are her therapist. The smile fractured slightly. We weren't informed of any therapeutic intervention. Our policy requires advance notification of all support personnel, background checks, liability waivers. Where is she? I'm not authorized to share student locations with unauthorized. A door opened down the hallway. A woman emerged gray-haired and stern-faced, wearing the kind of cardigan that suggested comfort while enforcing rules. Behind her, visible through the doorway, Ruby sat on a chair too big for her frame, clutching that aviator watch like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to earth. Mr. Brennan, the woman extended her hand. Judith Harper, school counselor. Ruby's been asking for you. Isaiah followed Harper into an office decorated with motivational posters that promised achievement through perseverance and sunshine. Ruby looked up when he entered, her face blotchy from crying, her eyes holding the particular exhaustion of someone who'd fought battles no 6-year-old should have to face. Hey, kiddo! Ruby launched herself at him, wrapping small arms around his waist with the desperate grip of someone drowning and finding solid ground. Isaiah froze for a heartbeat, his body remembering Caleb's hugs the way small children fit against adult frames like they'd been designed to fill the empty spaces. Then he knelt down eye level, his hands gentle on her shoulders. What happened? Tyler said dead people don't come back. He said his dad told him helicopters crash when pilots make mistakes, so my daddy must have been bad at flying. Ruby's voice came out small and broken. I told him to shut up, and the teacher sent me to the principal, and they said I was disrupting class with my grief. Isaiah's jaw tightened, anger flooding through him, with enough force to make his hands shake. He breathed through it the way he'd learned in trauma training, the way he'd taught parents to do when their children's suffering made them want to burn the world down. Your daddy wasn't bad at flying. Machines fail sometimes. It's not about being good or bad. It's just physics and bad luck and the universe not caring about fair. Tyler's dad is wrong and scared and saying stupid things because he doesn't know how to talk about death without making it someone's fault. Isaiah pulled origami paper from his pocket. You know what your dad did before he flew helicopters? Ruby shook her head. He built things, companies, partnerships, stuff that lasted. The helicopter might have crashed, but what he built is still here, including you. The teacher said I needed to control my emotions, that big girls don't yell. Big girls don't have to control emotions that are too big to fit inside polite spaces. They just need people who'll sit with them while the emotions do what they need to do. Isaiah started folding the paper, muscle memory guiding creases. Your mom told me you've been trying to make cranes. Want to learn the right way? Harper cleared her throat from the doorway, where she'd been watching with an expression Isaiah couldn't quite read. Mr. Brennan, may I speak with you outside? No, whatever you need to say, you can say in front of Ruby. She's earned that much honesty. Harper's mouth compressed into a line that had judged countless children and found them wanting. Trinity School maintains certain behavioral standards. Ruby's outburst violated our code of conduct. We have other students to consider, other families who expect a learning environment free from disruption. You mean you have rich families who pay too much money to let their children learn that grief is messy and doesn't follow your code of conduct? That's not. A 6-year-old watched her father die on television. Then you put her in a classroom with a kid whose dad blamed the victim, and when she defended her father's memory, you punished her for having emotions. You want to talk about behavioral standards? Start with the adults who created this situation. Harper's face flushed. Who exactly are you, Mr. Brennan? We have no record of you in our system, no clearance, no background check. For all we know, you're darn Isaiah Brennan, clinical psychology, Johns Hopkins, 14 peer-reviewed publications on childhood trauma, former consultant to the Department of Education, currently helping Ruby Ashford process selective mutism secondary to acute grief. Isaiah pulled his phone, showed his Hopkins faculty page archived, but still accessible. I left the profession after my 5-year-old son died of leukemia. Couldn't be around children anymore without remembering what I'd lost. But Ruby's teaching me that some things are worth remembering even when they hurt. The fight drained from Harper's expression, replaced by something closer to shame. I didn't know we weren't told about your credentials. Because credentials don't matter as much as caring. Ruby doesn't need another specialist with fancy degrees. She needs people who won't punish her for being human. Isaiah finished the crane, handed it to Ruby. This school can keep her or lose her. Her mom doesn't care which. But if you keep her, you better make damn sure every teacher in this building understands that grief doesn't fit in your behavioral code and trying to force it will only break the child. Harper nodded slowly. I'll speak with the headmaster. And Tyler's parents. Good. While you're at it, speak with your staff about trauma-informed teaching. I'll send you resources, free of charge. Isaiah stood, offering his hand to Ruby. Come on, kiddo, let's get out of here before these people remember they're supposed to pretend they have authority. They walked out of Trinity School together, past the receptionist, whose expression had shifted to uncertainty, past walls covered in photos of successful students who'd probably never experienced anything worse than a bad grade. Outside, the November cold bit through Isaiah's jacket. Ruby still held his hand, her grip firm, her breathing steady. Are you really my therapist? I'm really someone who cares what happens to you. The therapist part is just vocabulary. Mom's car is here. Ruby pointed to the town car idling at the curb. Margot stepped out, her face a mask of controlled panic. Is she expelled? No, but she might be if Trinity doesn't get its act together regarding grief education. Isaiah watched Ruby run to her mother, watched Margot kneel and pull her daughter into a hug that looked like it was holding back tears through pure force of will. We need to talk tonight about what Ruby needs going forward. Dinner, 7, my place. Margot's voice left no room for negotiation. Dr. Foster will be there. We're figuring this out as a team, whether you like teams or not. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building where even the doorman's uniform cost more than Isaiah's monthly rent. He arrived at 7 wearing the same jacket he'd worn to Trinity, carrying nothing but the origami paper in his pocket and the hollow conviction that this was a terrible idea that would end in disaster. Margot opened the door herself, barefoot in jeans and a sweater that suggested she'd been aiming for casual and landed somewhere around calculated. Ruby stood behind her, already in pajamas, clutching a paper crane that looked suspiciously like the one Isaiah had folded earlier. Dr. Foster's in the study. Ruby wanted to show you her room first. The penthouse sprawled across 10,000 square feet of tasteful luxury, but Ruby's room felt different, smaller, warmer, and filled with the detritus of childhood that no interior designer could fake. Books piled on shelves, stuffed animals arranged in what looked like a council of war, and on the desk a collection of mangled origami attempts that would have made Isaiah laugh if they hadn't been so heartbreaking in their determination. I've been practicing. They keep falling apart. That's because paper remembers wrong folds. Once you crease it the wrong way, it wants to go back there, even when you're trying to teach it something new. Isaiah picked up one of the attempts, studied the places where enthusiasm had overridden technique. Want me to show you the first step, this one? Then you can practice until your hands remember what your eyes saw. They spent 20 minutes on the floor, Isaiah guiding Ruby's fingers through the basic valley fold, watching her repeat it until muscle memory started to form. Margot appeared in the doorway twice, watching without interrupting her expression, softening into something that looked dangerously close to hope. Dr. Foster waited in the study, a room lined with books that probably cost more than their content would ever be worth. She'd claimed the leather chair by the window, her presence somehow making the space feel less intimidating, more human. Ruby's doing better. Already. Foster directed the observation at Margot, who'd followed them in and was pouring wine with the mechanical efficiency of someone who needed something to do with her hands. 2 hours with you, and she's making eye contact again. Talking in full sentences. Actually smiling. It's been 4 days, not 2 hours. Don't give me credit for momentum that probably would have happened anyway. Would it? Margot handed Isaiah a glass of wine he hadn't asked for. She spent 3 days in her room after I fired you. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak. Drew the same picture over and over, a bird with broken wings. Isaiah set the wine down untouched. I need to talk to you about Preston Vance. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Margot's casual demeanor evaporated, replaced by the CEO who'd built an empire through ruthless competence. What about him? Isaiah pulled his phone, opened the photos he'd taken that night in Preston's office. I saw these while cleaning, took pictures before I thought about whether I should. But looking at them now, he handed the phone to Margot. That's a list of 39 employees, 87% Black or Latino, every single one denied promotion for the past 6 years. Reasons all variations of cultural fit concerns. Margot's face went pale as she scrolled through the images. This can't be right. We have protocols, HR oversight. I would have known. Would you? When's the last time you reviewed promotion metrics by demographic? When's the last time you spoke to someone below director level about their career trajectory? That's what managers are for. And when managers are the problem, when the system itself is designed to filter people out based on characteristics they can't change. Isaiah took his phone back. There's an email chain, Preston to HR, talking about maintaining traditional leadership optics. About delaying minority promotions until after some merger that never seems to happen. Foster leaned forward. Isaiah, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying Ashford Global has a discrimination problem. Systematic, documented. Going back at least 6 years, probably longer. And someone needs to care enough to dig into it before more people get buried by a system that's supposed to be neutral. Margot walked to the window, staring out at the city that glittered below like a circuit board, all connections and power flows. If you're right, and I'm not saying you are, but if you're right, the liability alone would be catastrophic. Class action lawsuit, federal investigation. The company Graham built would be destroyed. Maybe it should be, if it's built on crushing people because of their skin color. Or maybe it could be saved, reformed, turned into something better. Margot turned back, and Isaiah saw the calculation happening behind her eyes, the executive weighing options and outcomes. You want access to verify what you saw, fine. I'll reinstate you as a consultant. Access to all floors, all databases, complete freedom of movement. Document everything. But you bring me evidence before you take it anywhere else. Give me a chance to fix this internally. And if internal fixes mean burying it, then you do what you need to do, and I'll live with the consequences. Margot's voice steadied. But I'm asking you to believe that I'm not my husband. I don't know what Graham built into this company's foundation. I don't know if he knew or cared or just looked away because it was convenient. But I'm looking now because Ruby's watching what I do when I think no one's paying attention, and I'll be damned if I teach her that silence is easier than justice. Foster set down her wine. This is insane. You're essentially hiring him to investigate your own company for federal crimes. No, I'm hiring him to tell me the truth. What happens after that depends on what the truth demands. Isaiah studied Margot's face, looking for the calculation that would betray this as manipulation, as risk management dressed up as integrity. But all he found was exhaustion and fear and the desperate hope of someone who'd lost too much to lose herself too. I'll need full HR access, employee files, promotion records, salary data, and I interview people who've left the company, get their side of the story. Done. I'll have IT set up your credentials by Monday. One more thing. If I find evidence that Graham started this, that it goes back to him, I'm not protecting his memory. Ruby deserves to know her father as he was, not as some sanitized version you're trying to preserve. Margot flinched like he'd struck her. Graham was a good man. Good men can build bad systems, especially when those systems make them money. Isaiah stood the weight of what he was agreeing to settling across his shoulders like stones. I'm doing this for the 39 people on that list, for every person who got passed over because Preston or your husband or whoever else decided their face didn't match the right demographic. Not for you, not for Ashford Global. for them. I know. And I'm helping Ruby because she deserves someone who won't lie about how much the world can hurt. But don't mistake that for me being part of your family or your team or whatever narrative you're building. I'm here because it's the right thing to do. The second it stops being right, I'm gone. Margot nodded, something in her expression cracking open to reveal the grief she'd been managing behind executive competence. Fair enough. We start Monday, 9 a.m., my office. Bring everything you've got. Isaiah left the penthouse and took the elevator down 47 floors past the other people who lived in this building, past Dorman, who'd perfected the art of seeing without looking past the lobby where Ruby had found him on that marble floor, and somehow convinced him that hope might be stubborn enough to survive after all. The subway carried him home through tunnels that smelled like 1,000 small abandonments. His apartment waited small and honest, containing everything he owned and nothing that made life feel like more than just not dying. He sat at his card table and pulled up the photos on his phone, studied the evidence of 39 people whose careers had been quietly strangled, while the company that employed them pretended discrimination was a solved problem from decades past. Then he opened his laptop and started building the spreadsheet that would either save them or get him killed trying. Outside his window, the Bronx settled into Friday night, the sound of car alarms and distant music, and people living lives that pressed forward despite every reason to stay still. Isaiah worked until 3 a.m. cross-referencing names with LinkedIn profiles, calculating salary disparities, building a case that would either bring justice or get buried so deep it would take decades to dig out. Somewhere in the middle of the work, his phone buzzed. Text from Simone. Cemetery tomorrow, 10 a.m., please come. He'd want you there. Isaiah stared at the message, then at Caleb's photo, then at the spreadsheet showing 39 people who needed someone to care enough to fight. Hope is a stubborn thing, buddy. Guess I'm finally stubborn enough to match. He finished the spreadsheet at dawn, sent it to an encrypted cloud drive, and tried to sleep for 3 hours before giving up and making coffee. The cemetery waited. Caleb waited. And somehow, so did the future, uncertain and terrifying and demanding he show up anyway. The cemetery spread across 40 acres of Queens, like a library of grief written in stone. Isaiah arrived at 9:45, early enough to delay the inevitable, late enough that he couldn't pretend he'd gotten lost or changed his mind. November had stripped the trees to skeletons, leaving nothing between earth and sky except the raw honesty of branches that refused to apologize for being bare. Simone stood by Caleb's headstone wearing a black coat that looked new and grief that looked ancient. 4 years hadn't erased the lines around her eyes or the way she held herself like someone bracing for the next blow. She'd remarried last year. Isaiah had learned this from a mutual friend who thought he should know, though he'd never been clear on why other people's forward momentum should matter to someone stuck in permanent reverse. She didn't turn when Isaiah approached, but her shoulders tensed in recognition. I didn't think you'd come. Neither did I until I was already on the train. The headstone was simple gray granite engraved with facts that couldn't contain the magnitude of what they marked. Caleb James Brennan, 2015-2020, beloved son. The earth above it had settled over the years, becoming indistinguishable from the surrounding grass, except for the rectangle of intentional flowers someone Simone obviously had planted to mark the space as tended, as remembered, as still mattering to the living. Isaiah knelt, his knees protesting the cold ground. Someone had left toys at the base of the stone, a small truck, 2 action figures, a book about dinosaurs that Caleb had demanded they read 17 times in the week before his last hospital admission. Isaiah picked up the book, its pages swollen from weather and time. I bring him something every week, things I think he'd like if he were. Simone's voice fractured. If he were here. You don't have to explain. Don't I? You disappeared, stopped answering calls, signed the divorce papers without even asking why. I waited for you to fight, to care, to show me that Caleb's death hadn't killed every part of you that used to love me. Isaiah set the book back down with careful precision, arranging it so the title faced outward. I couldn't fight, couldn't care, could barely breathe without remembering his last breath. Every time I looked at you, I saw the hospital room. Every conversation we tried to have ended at the same place, him being gone, and us being here, and neither of us knowing how to exist in a world that kept spinning like his death was just weather. So you chose to be alone, to work a job that required nothing, to become someone I wouldn't recognize. Simone finally turned her face, carrying accusation and concern in equal measure. I heard from Dr. Foster. She said you're helping a little girl with trauma, that you're using your training again. Not by choice, she found me, wouldn't let me hide. Good. Maybe she's smarter than both of us were. Simone brushed dead leaves from the headstone. I came here to tell you I'm pregnant, due in March, a girl. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through every certainty Isaiah had built about how the future would look. Simone having another child, creating life that would exist in a timeline where Caleb had been replaced by forward motion, by the stubborn insistence that joy could follow devastation if you just kept putting one foot ahead of the other. Congratulations. And is that all you can say? Congratulations, like I won a prize, like I'm not terrified every second that this baby will die too, that I'll love her and lose her and have to bury another child in this godforsaken place. What do you want me to say, Simone? That I'm happy for you, that I think it's brave or beautiful, or any of the words people use when they don't know how to talk about building on top of ruins. Isaiah stood, his hands shaking. You got to move forward. You found someone who could give you what I couldn't. You get to believe in futures again. I'm happy for you, genuinely. And I'm terrified for you. And I'm so goddamn jealous I can barely stand to look at you because you figured out how to keep living, and I'm still just surviving. Simone stepped closer, close enough that Isaiah could smell the perfume she used to wear before Caleb died, back when they'd been people who made plans beyond next week. Then stop surviving and start living. Help that little girl. Investigate whatever corruption you found. Do something that makes Caleb's death mean something more than just the end of everything. His death doesn't have to mean anything. That's not how meaning works. No, but your life after his death could mean something, if you let it. Simone pulled an envelope from her coat. I wrote you a letter, every year on his birthday. Never sent them because you made it clear you didn't want contact. But Foster said you're opening doors again. So here, 4 years of things I needed to say to someone who'd understand. Isaiah took the envelope, thick with paper and ink and the accumulated weight of grief that had been processed through writing instead of conversation. Why now? Because my daughter deserves to know she had a brother. And because you deserve to know that Caleb's death didn't kill every good thing. It just buried them for a while. You can dig them up if you try. She kissed his cheek, brief, platonic, final, and walked back toward the cemetery entrance, where a man waited by a Subaru, patient and solid, probably the kind of person who knew how to hold space for someone else's ghost without making them his own. Isaiah stayed by the headstone until the cold seeped through his jacket and reminded him that bodies had limits, even when grief didn't. He pulled origami paper from his pocket and folded a crane, placed it next to the dinosaur book, where wind or rain or some helpful groundskeeper would eventually destroy it. The impermanence felt appropriate. Nothing lasted except the memory of what had been lost. I'm helping a kid buddy, little girl named Ruby. She's got your stubborn hope gene. Doesn't know when to quit. You'd like her. Isaiah's voice cracked. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. Don't know if I can be what she needs. But I'm trying. That's gotta count for something. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the grave, and Isaiah chose to believe it was answer enough. Monday arrived wearing the particular brutality of deadline pressure and insufficient sleep. Isaiah spent Sunday night organizing evidence, building timelines, cross-referencing salary data against promotion records, until patterns emerged with the clarity of constellations, arbitrary groupings that took on meaning through sheer weight of accumulated observation. 39 employees, average time to first promotion, Black employees 6.1 years, white employees 2.3 years, Latino employees 5.8 years. The disparities weren't subtle. They were structural, embedded so deep into the company's DNA that they'd become invisible through familiarity. Ashford Global's lobby at 8:30 Monday morning hummed with the particular energy of people who believed their work mattered. Isaiah navigated through them wearing visitor credentials that granted him access to floors he'd only ever cleaned, to databases he'd only ever seen through office windows while pushing a mop cart. The elevator carried him to 47 with the smooth efficiency of machinery that never questioned where bodies belonged. Margot's assistant, a woman named Patricia, whose expression suggested she'd been warned about Isaiah but hadn't decided what to make of him yet, directed him to a conference room that could seat 20 but currently held 3. Margot at the head of the table, Dr. Foster to her right, and empty chairs waiting for Isaiah and whatever evidence he'd brought to justify upending the architecture of a company that had functioned without his scrutiny for decades. You look terrible. Foster's observation came without judgment, just clinical assessment of someone who recognized exhaustion in all its forms. Didn't sleep much. Spent yesterday at my son's grave, then all night building the case against your employer. Margot flinched at the casual reference to Caleb, but recovered quickly. Show me what you have. Isaiah connected his laptop to the projection system, pulling up spreadsheets that turned 39 lives into data points, salaries, promotion dates, performance reviews that read like Mad Libs of corporate bias. I started with the list I photographed, tracked each person's career trajectory. Then I pulled comparable white employees, hired the same year, similar roles, similar performance metrics. The pattern holds across departments, across skill levels, across every variable except race. The numbers filled the screen. Keisha Washington, MBA from Wharton, 9 years at Ashford, 0 promotions. Her white colleague hired the same month was now director level, earning $42,000 more annually. Marcus Cole, 14 years with the company, still analyst grade. His white peer with identical credentials had been promoted 4 times, currently pulled in 6 figures, while Marcus scraped by on $68,000 in one of the most expensive cities in America. Name after name, career after career, a systematic crushing of potential that had been operating so smoothly it hadn't even tried to hide. Jesus, Margot's voice came out hollow. How did I not see this? Because you weren't looking. Because systems like this depend on people in power being too comfortable to question whether their comfort comes at someone else's expense. Isaiah advanced to the next slide. But here's where it gets interesting. I found email chains, Preston to HR, specifically to Sandra Wilkes in talent management, talking about maintaining optics, about ensuring the right cultural fit at senior levels, about delaying promotions for strategic timing that never seems to arrive. Foster leaned forward. That's not just bias. That's conspiracy. Coordinated discrimination, which is why it's federal, Title VII violations, disparate impact, possible wire fraud if we can prove they use company communications to coordinate civil rights violations. Isaiah pulled up an email dated 6 years earlier, sender Graham Ashford, recipient Preston Vance. And here's the foundation. Your husband to his CFO, board meeting concerns about diversity metrics, need to manage optics without disrupting leadership pipeline. Your discretion appreciated. Margot's face drained of color. She stood, walked to the window, pressed her forehead against glass that probably cost more per square foot than most people's homes. Graham wouldn't have meant it like that. He cared about the company's reputation, about stability. He cared more about white comfort than black careers. Doesn't matter what he meant, matters what he enabled. Isaiah softened his voice, recognizing the devastation of having the dead revealed as complicit. I'm not saying he was a monster. I'm saying he built a system that ate people alive and called it business as usual. Preston just kept feeding it. What do you need from me? Access to HR files, every employee who left in the past 6 years, exit interview notes, and I need to talk to people without company lawyers present. Get their stories. Build testimony that can't be dismissed as statistical anomaly. Margot turned back, her executive mask reassembling itself over the raw grief of learning her husband's legacy was poisoned. You'll have it by end of day. But Isaiah, if this goes public, the company faces existential threat. Lawsuits, federal investigation. Everything Graham built was constructed on top of people whose careers he buried for being the wrong color. Maybe it deserves to burn. Or maybe it deserves to be rebuilt. Better, without the rot at its foundation. Margot's voice steadied. I'm not asking you to bury this. I'm asking you to give me a chance to fix it before you detonate the bomb. Let me fire Preston, compensate the 39 people on your list, reform promotion protocols, show that accountability doesn't require destruction. Foster cut in before Isaiah could respond. And what happens to the 39 people while you're managing optics? They get paid off and sign NDAs, get told their suffering was just a regrettable oversight that a check can solve. No, they get restitution, promotions, back pay for every dollar they should have earned if the system had been fair. And they get the choice to leave or stay with full severance either way. Margot pulled her phone, started typing notes. I'll create an independent review board. External auditors, quarterly reports to ensure this never happens again. Isaiah studied her face, looking for the calculation that would betray this as damage control as the minimum necessary response to avoid maximum liability. But what he found was exhaustion that matched his own, the particular weariness of someone who'd thought they were building something good and discovered they'd been standing on a graveyard the whole time. I need to talk to them first. The 39, get their stories, find out what they want, Not what you think they should want, what they actually need to feel like justice happened. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Some of them left the city, left their careers entirely because Ashford crushed them so thoroughly they couldn't imagine fighting back. Margot nodded. Do it, whatever you need. But Isaiah Preston can't know. If he suspects we're investigating, he'll destroy evidence, cover tracks, maybe even threaten people into silence. Then we move carefully. I start with people who've already left. Build the case from the outside in. By the time Preston knows what's happening, we have everything documented and ready for federal review. There's one more thing. Foster pulled out her tablet, showing an article from that morning's Post. Billionaire's daughter finds comfort in unlikely source. The photo showed Isaiah and Ruby leaving Trinity School. His hand on her shoulder, her face turned up toward him with trust that looked vulnerable in print. Preston leaked this, or someone who works for him. Foster scrolled through comments that ranged from supportive to vicious, racist dog whistles barely disguised as concern for child safety. He's trying to discredit you before you become a bigger threat. Isaiah's stomach turned reading comments that called him predatory, opportunistic, a janitor who'd somehow conned his way into proximity to wealth and innocence. How bad can this get? Bad enough to destroy your credibility before you ever file a complaint. Bad enough that when you present evidence of discrimination, people will assume it's retaliation for being fired rather than legitimate whistleblowing. Margot took the tablet, scanned the article with visible fury. I'm calling our PR firm, issuing a statement that you're a credentialed psychologist providing therapeutic support, that Trinity School fully vetted and approved your involvement. That'll make it worse. Streisand effect. Better to ignore it and focus on building the case. Once we have evidence that can't be dismissed, Preston's smear campaign won't matter. Foster shook her head. You're forgetting that public opinion shapes legal outcomes. If Preston successfully paints you as unstable, opportunistic, the EEOC might dismiss your complaint as motivated by personal vendetta. We need to get ahead of this. The door opened. Patricia leaned in, her expression suggesting the morning was about to get significantly worse. Ms. Ashford, there's a detective here to see you about Mr. Brennan. The conference room suddenly felt smaller, the air thinner. Isaiah's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Preston had escalated beyond media manipulation into criminal accusations. The machinery of law enforcement, which had been designed to protect people like Isaiah, but had been repurposed into a weapon against them, was about to grind forward with the blind certainty of systems that never questioned their own righteousness. Send him in. The detective who entered wore plainclothes that screamed cop cheap suit, cheaper tie, eyes that had seen too much humanity to trust any of it. White, 50s, the kind of face that had learned to hide bias behind professional courtesy. Detective Robert Sullivan, NYPD. I need to ask Mr. Brennan some questions about his relationship with Ruby Ashford. Margot stood, her posture shifting into the corporate warrior who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals and never shown weakness. My daughter's therapeutic relationship with Dr. Brennan is completely appropriate and fully documented. Who filed a complaint? Anonymous tip, claims Mr. Barrow. Brennan has inappropriate contact with a minor. Given his employment history, fired under suspicious circumstances, now spending unsupervised time with a 6-year-old, we have to investigate. I'm never unsupervised with Ruby. Dr. Foster is present during every session. Trinity School staff are aware and supportive. This is a smear campaign by someone who has reasons to want me discredited. Isaiah kept his voice level, knowing that any hint of anger would be interpreted as guilt, any defenses as protest that proved the accusation. Sullivan pulled a notepad, the theatrical gesture of someone who already had his conclusions drawn, but needed to document the process. Walk me through your relationship with the child, when it started, how often you see her, what happens during these meetings. I encountered Ruby in the Ashford Global lobby approximately 4 weeks ago. She'd left the penthouse, came down while I was working night shift. She was nonverbal suffering, selective mutism, secondary to witnessing her father's death on television. I sat with her, made origami. She spoke her first words in 5 months. And then, Ms. Ashford fired me for insubordination when I declined her initial offer to work as Ruby's therapist. Dr. Foster intervened, convinced Ms. Ashford that my credentials and experience with childhood trauma made me qualified to help. I was reinstated as a consultant. I now meet with Ruby twice weekly, always with Dr. Foster present, focusing on art therapy and grief processing. Sullivan wrote nothing down, just stared at Isaiah with the particular skepticism cops reserve for black men whose stories sounded too convenient, whose explanations required believing in coincidence rather than criminality. You went from janitor to therapist in 4 weeks. That's quite a promotion. I went from hiding in a job that required nothing to helping a child who needed someone who understood her pain. That's not promotion. That's just finally doing what I was trained to do before my own son died, and I couldn't be around children without remembering what I'd lost. Your son, Caleb, died of leukemia in 2020. Sullivan had done his homework, probably spent the weekend digging through Isaiah's life, looking for patterns that would confirm whatever bias he'd brought to the investigation. You resigned from Johns Hopkins shortly after. Divorced. Took work that didn't match your education level. Some might say that's a sign of instability. Some might say that's grief. That watching your 5-year-old die breaks something that doesn't heal on convenient timelines. Isaiah's hands clenched under the table. I'm not unstable. I'm functional. There's a difference, and Ruby benefits from having someone in her life who won't lie about how much loss hurts. Foster interjected, her voice carrying professional authority that demanded Sullivan treat her as peer rather than obstacle. I'm a licensed child psychologist with 30 years experience. I recommended Isaiah for Ruby's care precisely because of his background and his personal experience with childhood death. Every session is documented. Ruby's progress has been remarkable. Her mother is fully informed and supportive. This anonymous tip is harassment, not legitimate concern. Maybe, but I still need to interview the child. Standard protocol when allegations involve minors. Margot's face went rigid with fury that was learning to disguise itself as cooperation. You can interview Ruby with me present in our home with our attorney present, and I'll be filing a complaint against whoever made this anonymous tip for abuse of police resources and attempted intimidation. Sullivan snapped his notepad closed. I'll need to schedule that interview by end of week. In the meantime, Mr. Brennan, I'd recommend limiting contact with Ruby Ashford until this investigation concludes, for your own protection. No. Isaiah stood meeting Sullivan's eyes with the kind of direct challenge that black men had learned was dangerous, but sometimes necessary. Ruby's making progress. Disrupting that progress because some coward filed a false complaint would be cruel to her and ineffective as protection for me. If someone wants to destroy my reputation, pulling back from helping a traumatized child won't stop them. It'll just mean they win. Sullivan's expression hardened. That sounds like someone who's got something to hide. That sounds like someone who's done hiding from the things that matter. Isaiah walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Interview Ruby, check my credentials, talk to Trinity School, do whatever investigation you need. You'll find exactly what I told you, a child who's healing because someone finally gave her permission to grieve honestly. If that's a crime, then prosecute me. But don't ask me to abandon her because someone with an agenda decided truth was disposable. He left before Sullivan could respond, walking through Ashford Global's halls with the particular clarity that came from having nothing left to lose except the fragile belief that standing up for what was right still mattered in a world designed to reward looking away. The elevator carried him down to the main lobby where he'd first met Ruby, where this entire cascade of consequences had started with a paper crane and a child who'd recognized grief in a stranger's eyes. Isaiah sat on the marble floor in the exact spot where he'd been 4 weeks earlier, pulled origami paper from his pocket, and started folding. You gonna get in trouble for sitting there? The security guard Morrison approached with coffee and the kind of tired sympathy that came from watching too many good people get crushed by systems that protected power over truth. Probably, but I'm already in trouble. Might as well sit somewhere comfortable while the world decides what to do with me. Morrison sat down next to him, joints creaking, radio crackling with the mundane emergencies of a building where nothing was ever allowed to go catastrophically wrong. I've worked here 14 years, seen a lot of people come through. Most of them don't even look at folks like us. You're different. You see us? That scares certain people. Preston, among others, man's been running this company like his personal fiefdom since Mr. Ashford died. Ms. Ashford's trying to change things, but there's resistance. People who liked how things were. People who benefited from keeping certain folks in certain places. Isaiah finished the crane, set it on the marble between them. How bad is it, the discrimination? You've been here long enough to see patterns. Morrison picked up the crane, studied it with the careful attention of someone who rarely got asked his opinion about anything that mattered. Bad enough that I stopped recommending this place to my nephew when he graduated college. Told him find somewhere that had actually let him climb instead of keeping him in the basement his whole career. Would you testify if it came to that? If there was an EEOC investigation? Testify to what? That I've watched talented people get passed over for 14 years, that promotion metrics somehow always favor folks who look like Mr. Vance. That'd be career suicide. Or it'd be the thing that saves 39 other people from getting crushed the way you've been crushed. Your choice. But I'm building a case, and I need people brave enough to say out loud what everyone knows in whispers. Morrison handed back the crane. Let me think about it. I got 2 kids in college. Can't afford to lose this job on principle. Fair enough, but Morrison principle is the only thing that doesn't lose value when everything else falls apart. I learned that from my son. He was 5 and dying, and he still believed people should do right by each other even when it cost them something. If a kindergartner could figure that out, grown men probably can too. The guard stood knees protesting radio, calling him back to the mundane work of monitoring people and spaces that would never know his name. I'll think about it. And Mr. Brennan, whatever happens with that detective, don't let them make you small. You're doing something that matters. That always pisses off people who've made peace with things not mattering. Isaiah spent the rest of Monday tracking down former Ashford employees, calling numbers that had been disconnected, sending emails that bounced back, finding people who'd been so thoroughly defeated by the company, they'd erased it from their lives entirely. 3 answered. 2 agreed to talk. 1 hung up the second she heard Ashford's name, and Isaiah didn't blame her. Tuesday brought the first interview, Keisha Washington sitting in a coffee shop in Harlem that smelled like burnt beans and broken dreams. She'd aged since her LinkedIn photo lines carved deep around eyes that had learned to expect disappointment. I gave Ashford 9 years. 9 years of 60-hour weeks, flawless performance reviews, watching white men with half my credentials skip past me like I was furniture. She stirred sugar into coffee that didn't need it, the mechanical action of hands that needed something to do. They kept saying next quarter or after the restructure or when the right opportunity emerges. The opportunity never emerged. I finally took a job at a startup where they actually cared about talent over optics. Isaiah recorded on his phone documentation that would either build a case or sit in a cloud drive forever if courage failed. Did anyone ever explicitly mention race as a factor? They didn't have to. It was always cultural fit or leadership presence or some other code that meant you make the whiteboard members uncomfortable. Preston once told me I was too direct for senior leadership. My white colleague who yelled in meetings, he was passionate and decisive. Same behavior, different consequences based on melanin levels. Would you testify to this if there was a federal investigation? Keisha's laugh came out bitter. And destroy any chance I have at another corporate job. Get blacklisted as the angry black woman who sued her employer. I want justice, same as anyone. But I also want to eat, want to pay rent, want to not become a cautionary tale about what happens when you speak up. What if you weren't alone? What if all 39 people testified became too big to ignore or dismiss? She studied Isaiah with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd learned to spot manipulation wearing the disguise of righteousness. Who are you really? You're not HR, not corporate, not another diversity consultant hired to make problems look solved without actually solving them. I'm someone who found evidence and decided he couldn't look away. That's all. Just a person who's tired of watching systems crush people for the crime of existing wrong. That's all. Keisha's expression softened slightly. That's everything. Most people see and turn around, decide it's not their problem, convince themselves that speaking up won't change anything, so why risk it? My son believed people should help each other even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I let him down by disappearing after he died. Maybe helping you and the other 38 is how I make that right. Your son was smarter than most adults I know. Yeah, he was. Keisha pulled a business card from her purse, wrote a number on the back. This is Marcus Cole. He's still at Ashford. 14 years. Still trapped in the same role he started in. If you can get him to talk, you'll have someone on the inside. Someone who can't be dismissed as disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind. The week collapsed into a blur of interviews and documentation, building a case that grew more damning with every testimony. Marcus Cole met him Thursday evening in Prospect Park, nervous as a prey animal, checking over his shoulder like Preston might materialize from the gathering darkness. I can't lose this job. I've got a mortgage, a son who needs braces, a wife who's already working 2 jobs to make ends meet because Ashford pays me 40% less than my white colleagues in identical roles. Then help me change it. Testify. Make them pay you what you're worth instead of what they think they can get away with. Marcus shook his head, fear winning the battle against righteous anger. You don't understand. Preston has power. He'll destroy me, find some excuse to fire me, blacklist me across the industry, make sure I never work again. He can only do that if he wins. If we build a case so strong that the EEOC has no choice but to investigate, if we get enough people telling the same story that it stops being individual grievance and becomes institutional crime, and if we lose, if the system protects itself the way it always does, if we end up unemployed and broke and watching from outside while nothing changes. Isaiah didn't have an answer that wasn't a gamble dressed up as certainty. Then we lose knowing we tried. That's all we get sometimes. The chance to stand up and say, this is wrong, even when the outcome's uncertain. My son taught me that hope is stubborn. Maybe justice is too. Marcus looked out across the park where joggers chased health and dog walkers chased peace, and the city kept moving like individual suffering was just background noise in someone else's story. Let me talk to my wife, if she's okay with the risk I'm in, but I need a few days. Take them. We move when everyone's ready, not before. Friday arrived wearing the weight of an entire week compressed into hours that felt like months. Ruby's session at the penthouse went well. She'd finally mastered the valley fold, her cranes emerging less mangled, more recognizable as attempts at flight rather than disasters of good intentions. Dr. Foster watched with the satisfaction of someone whose professional judgment had been validated by results. Then Detective Sullivan arrived for his interview with Ruby, bringing with him the particular tension of law enforcement intruding into spaces designed to keep it at arm's length. Margot's lawyer, a woman named Patricia Sterling, who wore expensive suits and expensive contempt for cops who overstepped, sat beside Sullivan with a legal pad and an expression that promised warfare if this interview deviated from protocol. Ruby answered questions with the directness of children who hadn't learned yet that truth could be weaponized against you. Yes, she liked Isaiah. Yes, he made her feel safe. Yes, they folded paper together and talked about sad things, and sometimes he told her stories about his son who died. Does he ever touch you in ways that make you uncomfortable? Sullivan's question came soft, gentle, poisoned, with the kind of concern that wore investigation like camouflage. He hugs me when I cry, like mommy does. But he asks first if I want a hug, and if I say no, he just sits next to me instead. Has he ever asked you to keep secrets? Told you not to tell your mom about things that happen when you're together? No, he tells me to tell mommy everything. Says secrets are bad except for birthday presents and surprise parties. Sullivan continued for 20 more minutes, circling the same territory from different angles, looking for inconsistencies that would justify the investigation's existence. Ruby answered each question with the kind of honesty that dismantled whatever narrative he'd constructed about predatory behavior disguised as therapy. Finally, Sullivan closed his notebook. Thank you, Ruby. You've been very helpful. After Ruby was dismissed, Sterling turned to Sullivan with a smile that could cut glass. You have no case. Zero evidence. Zero concerning behavior. An anonymous tip from someone with obvious ulterior motives. If you continue harassing my client or Dr. Brennan, I'll file complaints with your supervisor and every oversight body that might care about police resources being wasted on manufactured scandals. We take all allegations seriously. You take allegations from white anonymous callers seriously. I doubt you'd have shown up this fast if someone had called about a white therapist working with a black child. But here we are investigating a black man for the crime of being competent and caring. Sterling stood, straightening papers that didn't need straightening. Get out and tell whoever hired you to harass Isaiah Brennan that it didn't work. Sullivan left his expression suggesting he knew he'd lost, but wasn't sure how it had happened. Isaiah waited until the door closed before exhaling tension that had been building in his chest like floodwater behind a failing dam. That was close. That was nothing. Margot poured herself scotch from the decanter that probably cost more than Isaiah's yearly rent. The real threat is Preston. He knows we're investigating. He's trying to discredit you before you can destroy him, which means we need to move faster. Get the evidence filed. Make it public before he can bury it. I'm not filing until everyone's ready, until Marcus and the others feel safe enough to put their names on official complaints. Rushing gives Preston time to retaliate against people who can't afford to lose their jobs. Foster cut in her tone, suggesting she'd been thinking about this longer than the last 5 minutes. There might be another way. What if we don't file with EEOC first? What if we take this directly to the press? Make it so public that Preston can't retaliate without proving our point about institutional discrimination. That's suicide. EEOC complaints have legal protection, whistleblower status. Going to the press first forfeits those protections. Makes it look like we're doing this for attention rather than justice. Or it forces Ashford's hand. Margot set down her scotch. If the story breaks that we're investigating systemic racism internally, that we're offering restitution to affected employees, it changes the narrative. We're not the villain. We're the company trying to fix what previous leadership broke. Isaiah studied her face, recognizing the calculation that came from years of managing crises and spinning disasters into opportunities. You want to control the story, get ahead of it. Turn this into a PR win instead of an existential threat. I want to do right by the 39 people on your list, while also making sure the company survives to employ the 3,000 people who depend on it for their livelihoods. Those aren't mutually exclusive goals if we're smart about execution. They are if being smart means the 39 get paid off and told to sign NDAs while Preston gets a golden parachute and a new job at some other company where he can discriminate all over again. Isaiah stood, exhaustion making him blunt. I didn't spend 2 weeks building this case so you could manage optics. I did it so people who've been crushed could finally be heard. And heard means their stories get told in full, not sanitized into corporate press releases that protect everyone except them. Then what do you want? Isaiah Full Scorched Earth Company destroyed thousands unemployed Preston in prison, and the 39 people vindicated but still living in a world where speaking up got them labeled as troublemakers. No one else will hire. Margot's voice rose. There's no clean win here. Only degrees of compromise between perfect justice and pragmatic survival. The argument hung between them, both right and both wrong, trapped in the impossible space where principle met reality, and neither side could afford to blink first. Ruby appeared in the doorway holding a paper crane, her voice small but clear. Are you fighting because of me? The question shattered whatever momentum the argument had built. Isaiah knelt eye level with a 6-year-old who'd learned too young that adults fighting meant someone she loved was about to disappear. No, kiddo. We're fighting because the world's messy and fixing it is hard, and sometimes grown-ups disagree about the best way to help people. He took the crane she offered. But we're not fighting about you. You're the one thing everyone agreed is worth protecting. Ruby nodded, solemn as judges delivering verdicts. Mommy, Isaiah's right. If people did bad things, they should say sorry and fix it. That's what you taught me. You're right, baby. Sometimes Mommy forgets her own lessons. Margot looked at Isaiah over Ruby's head. We do this your way. File the complaints. Let EEOC investigate. Whatever happens, happens. But I'm going on record now, for Ruby's future reference, I tried to fix it the wrong way first. Before I learned the right way costs more, but matters more. Isaiah stood, offered his hand to Margot, and sealed an agreement that would either save 39 people or destroy everyone involved trying. Monday would bring the filing, the point of no return, to him. The moment when Hope's stubbornness would either prove sufficient or reveal itself as just another form of magical thinking that couldn't survive contact with systems designed to protect themselves above all else.